Hi there, welcome to the Upcycle Design Lab. If you're new here, my name's Cindy and I craft using recycled and repurposed materials to give you ideas on ways to make and create more economically and ecologically. And today I have a quick video to answer some of your questions about working with aluminum cans, specifically in regards to safety. I frequently get asked about the sharp edges of my projects and whether or not I cut myself a lot when I'm working with the aluminum cans. I feel a little bit like this goes without saying because you are working with metal and it is possible to cut yourself, but if you're mindful about how you handle the material, it is possible to safely make all kinds of really fun and interesting projects with aluminum cans. So my advice, if you're interested in working with aluminum cans, give it a try, handle the material carefully until you're comfortable with it, and if you are more comfortable wearing gloves when you're working with the aluminum cans, by all means do so. The first thing that I want to mention is that there are probably a lot of different ways and tools that you can use to cut down aluminum cans. I have a pretty specific way that I break down my aluminum cans into flat sheets, little domed bottom pieces, top rings, and pull tabs. And if you're interested in that video, I will link to it in the description box. These are the 4 tools that I typically use when I'm breaking down the aluminum cans. I like to remove the tops with a tool called the draft top. I also use just a plain paring knife to start cutting the top and bottoms off the cans. And I finish cutting the tops and bottoms off with just a regular pair of scissors. And then to get down to this bottom piece, the aluminum is a little heavier at the bottom of the can, so I have a pair of tin snips that I use for that process. And the reason that I'm mentioning my tools is because if you use different tools to cut down your cans, you may or may not have some of the same problems or safety concerns that I do when I'm cutting my cans. I'm not really going to talk about the pull tabs because I think everybody's pretty comfortable pulling those off of their cans and not worrying about cutting themselves. But the other 3 portions of the can present some additional concerns as far as cutting yourself. In my experience, there's basically 3 different types of edges that you can have on your aluminum can. You can have a fairly smooth edge, you can have kind of a rougher edge, and you can run into burrs and splinters. Generally, you're going to end up with smooth edges when you cut with the scissors or with a very sharp knife. Some people cut their cans with X-Acto knives, I think. Or if you have a folded edge that breaks the can, you'll end up with a very smooth edge. And those edges, while you can still cut yourself maybe in a sort of a paper cut style of cut, those are pretty safe edges, I think, as far as holding the metal and handling the metal. When I cut the cans, like I said, I use a paring knife to start the cuts, and hopefully you can see this, but there's a much more rippled edge here than where I've cut with the scissors. And that presents a slightly more dangerous surface to work with. So you can either flatten those out with some kind of burnishing tool, or you can cut those edges off to avoid having to handle those edges. I think that by far the most dangerous part of cutting and working with the aluminum cans are the burrs and the splinters. And burrs can kind of show up any number of places. If you use the draft top to remove the top portion of your can, you can sometimes have a burr left inside where the can lid didn't come off quite cleanly and you ended up breaking it. So sometimes you can be left with a burr on the inside ring of the can, and you can get them around the edges of the can when you're cutting if you don't have a totally smooth cut. So it's important to be aware that these burrs exist and the rough spots exist, and to try to either cut them off, break them off, or avoid handling them in that position. And if you are cutting a lot of cans, you probably want to work over an area that can catch some of the small pieces of metal that will come off when you are working with a lot of cans and cutting up a lot of the metal. So as I mentioned, I believe that the smooth cut edges are pretty safe to work with, and I've made many projects where I did not finish the edges at all. I've made some rose bushes, I've made some sequins, I've made different faux plants, And all of those projects just were cut with a smooth edge, either on my Cricut cutting machine or with a pair of scissors, and then I just left the raw edges. In other cases, I have wanted a smoother finished edge, and so I'm going to talk about a few of the ways that I've finished the edges to cover up the either burrs, rough edges, or even the straight edges. There are probably a lot of other ways that you can finish the edges. If you have some, you can let me know in the comments, but these are the ones that I've used. So the first one is very simple. It's just folded edges, and I've used them on different projects. This is a garden marker that I recently made, and as the name suggests, the edges are just folded to the back of the metal. So in the front you still have some corners that are corners, but they're perfectly safe to touch, and then you have a folded edge in the front. Another way to finish the edges of aluminum, and I use this a lot, is some metal tape. It's very easy to work with. You can find it in the hardware store around the ductwork, and it has a paper backing on it, so it is very easy to cut and measure and use. And I use it a lot when I am working with the bottom dome pieces of the can, because it's very difficult to get the edge smooth. You can see on this piece that there are a lot of kind of bumps and rough edges. And so I have made little Christmas type ornaments where I sandwich two pieces together, and they're held together with a piece of the metal tape. I've also made some notebook covers out of embossed aluminum cans, and I've used the metal tape around the edges to finish off the notebooks. This is actually a project that I made out of tin cans, but you could do a similar application with the aluminum cans, and that is just to cover the edges of the metal with some hot glue. In this case, I had some different glitter hot glues, but if you have a glue gun, you can certainly cover the edges of your aluminum in the same way. Another product that I've used on the edges is dimensional paint. And you can use it in a similar way to the hot glue to go around the edges of the metal. The last method is to add a sealer or finishing coat, and I generally use that when I am making the aluminum can beads. And while it doesn't make a huge difference in how the beads feel, it does make a slightly notable difference. Now, I'm also using the high gloss Mod Podge, which is a little bit thicker, so presumably it's adding a little bit thicker coat of sealant than maybe a regular Mod Podge or just a regular sealer would do. Now the beads are what I get asked about the most, and I am not 100% sure how to answer the questions. Some people ask if they're dangerous or if you can cut yourself with them. I patently feel like I could not cut myself with these beads. However, they are not smooth beads in the sense that you would find if you just bought a bead at the store. They're rolled, and the metal is a little trickier to work with than paper, so they don't have the same uniform look that you might get with a paper rolled bead. And at the ends you have the metal edges. So while I do feel that it would be nearly impossible to cut yourself with the beads, they are not finished the same as a smooth bead that you would purchase from the store or in a piece of jewelry. But having said that, I've used these beads to make bracelets and earrings, and I've had a lot of fun creating several little insect plant charms from the beads as well. I hope this addresses some of your concerns about working with aluminum cans. You can hit the subscribe button if you'd like to join my YouTube community, and you can find lots more information about how I craft with aluminum cans and all of my aluminum can craft projects in the playlists below. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you back here soon in the lab for my next experiment.